Once there lived a man who lost everything in one day, his money, his health, even his children. But here's the wildest part: God called him the greatest man on earth. How could someone so broken be called so blessed? To understand, we must start at the beginning, when baby Job took his first breath in a land where camels roamed and miracles hid in the dust. Long ago, in a dusty land called Uz, a baby boy named Job was born. His first cry was as strong as the desert wind, and his parents knew he was special. Job grew up under the wide blue sky, surrounded by sandy hills and flocks of sheep. Even as a little boy, Job loved helping others. If he saw a hungry traveler, he shared his bread. If a lamb got lost, he carried it back to its mother. Everyone in Uz smiled when they saw Job, his kindness shone like the sun. At night, Job would gaze at the stars and wonder about God, who made them all. He prayed with a pure heart, thanking God for his family, his home, and the animals he cared for. Job's life was simple but happy. Little did he know, his faith would one day be tested in ways he could never imagine. Baby Job came from a very special family. His great-great-grandfather was Abraham, the father of God's people. Just like Abraham, Job loved God with all his heart. Job's family told him stories about how God promised to bless Abraham's children forever. They lived in tents and cared for sheep, just like their ancestors did. Every night before bed, Job's mother would say, "Remember, you belong to God's special family." Job would nod and hug his woolly blanket, feeling safe and loved. He didn't know it yet, but God had amazing plans for his life. Little Job grew taller each season, like a young palm tree stretching toward the sky. While other children played tricks, Job always chose kindness. He never took extra sweets when no one was looking, and always shared his toys without being asked. Every morning, Job helped his father feed the lambs. He treated every animal gently, even the stubborn goats who nibbled his clothes. At the village well, he let others go first when the line grew long. When the moon rose, Job's family gathered to pray. He listened carefully to stories of God's goodness, his round eyes reflecting the firelight. While some boys squirmed during prayers, Job sat still as a stone, soaking up every word. The elders nodded wisely when Job passed by. "That boy walks with God," they'd murmur. And it was true, in everything he did, Job tried to please God first. When Job became a young man, he met a kind and beautiful woman named Citis. She had dark eyes that sparkled like the night stars and a laugh that made everyone smile. Citis came from a noble family, but she loved Job for his good heart, not his flocks or land. Their wedding was the happiest day in Uz. People traveled from far away to celebrate. There was sweet honey cake, music that made feet dance, and so much food that even the birds got crumbs. Job wore his finest white robe, and Citis glowed in a dress woven with golden threads. After the feast, Job and Citis built their home together. She helped him care for the poor who came to their door. When travelers needed rest, Citis prepared the softest blankets. When children were hungry, she baked extra bread. At night, they would sit outside their tent, counting the stars and talking about their dreams. Job knew God had given him the perfect partner. Together, they would face whatever adventures life might bring. God blessed Job and Citis with 10 wonderful children, 7 strong sons and 3 beautiful daughters. Their home was always full of laughter and joy. The oldest son loved telling stories by the fire. The second son could tame any wild horse. The third son made the best bread in all of Uz. Each child had special gifts that made their family complete. Every evening, the children would gather around Job to hear wisdom stories. On feast days, they played games and sang songs together. The daughters braided each other's hair with colorful ribbons, while the sons practiced archery. Job loved each child in their own special way. He taught the boys to be honest shepherds and the girls to be wise homemakers. Citis showed them all how to be kind to others, just like their father. The children grew tall and strong, bringing honor to their family. Neighbors often said, "Look how Job's children love each other." Their unity was the greatest treasure of all. Job worked hard and God blessed him with incredible wealth. His flocks grew until he had 7,000 fluffy sheep that turned hillsides white, 3,000 strong camels that carried goods across deserts, 500 teams of oxen to plow fields, 500 gentle donkeys to help with work. His land stretched farther than the eye could see. Every morning, shepherds led the animals to green pastures while workers gathered dates and grains. Job's big red tent stood in the center of everything, always open to visitors. The smell of fresh bread and roasted meat filled the air as servants prepared meals. Caravans brought colorful fabrics, sparkling jewels, and spices from distant lands. But Job never forgot to share. Every Friday, he set out baskets of food for hungry families. When drought came, he gave water to thirsty travelers. His wealth wasn't just gold and animals, it was the love he showed others. Children loved visiting Job's lands. They giggled at baby lambs, rode donkeys in the olive groves, and listened wide-eyed as Job told stories under the stars. His greatest treasure wasn't what he owned, but how he used it to help everyone around him. Job became known as the wisest man in all of Uz. People traveled for days just to ask his advice. Under the big tamarisk tree in the center of town, Job would listen carefully to every problem. When two farmers argued over land, Job measured the fields fairly. When merchants disagreed about a sale, he helped them find solutions. Children would watch in awe as their parents nodded respectfully to Judge Job. But Job didn't just settle arguments, he helped those in need. Every harvest, he set aside one basket of grain for every hungry family, warm cloaks for cold winters, donkeys to help widows carry water. His storehouses always had extra, just in case someone came asking. The poor called him Job the kind-hearted, while the rich admired his fairness. At night after judging cases, Job would walk through town, checking on elderly neighbors. He knew true leadership meant caring for everyone, from the smallest child to the oldest shepherd. Every new moon, Job gathered his family for a special tradition. As the silver crescent appeared, he built an altar of smooth stones. His children watched quietly as their father selected the finest lambs from their flock. Job carefully placed the offerings on the altar, his hands steady and sure. The sweet smell of burning herbs rose to the sky like morning mist. "Just in case my children forgot you," Job would whisper to God, "please forgive them." His sons and daughters stood in a circle, their faces glowing in the firelight. Though they were grown, they still bowed their heads when Job prayed. Afterward, the family shared a feast of honey cakes and roasted grain, laughing together under the stars. Job never missed this monthly ritual. Even when business called him away, he always returned in time to pray for his family. Their safety mattered more than all his wealth. One day in heaven, something surprising happened. Satan stood before God and pointed down to earth where Job lived. "Of course Job loves you," Satan said. "You give him everything. Take away his blessings, and he'll stop loving you." God knew Job's heart was true. "You may test him," God said, "but you must not hurt Job himself." So Satan left heaven. He couldn't wait to make Job suffer. Meanwhile on earth, Job had no idea trouble was coming. He left his wife one morning to check on his flocks. The sun shone bright, the animals grazed peacefully, and everything seemed perfect. But then shouts echoed across the field. A messenger came running, his clothes torn. "Raiders stole all the oxen and donkeys," he cried. Before Job could speak, another servant arrived. "Fire fell from the sky. The sheep are all gone." Job's got scared as a third man came panting. "Bandits took the camels." Then worst of all, a fourth messenger. came crying. A mighty wind collapsed your oldest son's house. All your children were inside. Job fell to his knees in the dust. He was sad about the news. But then he did something amazing. He lifted his face to heaven and whispered, "God gave me these blessings. If he takes them away, I will still love him." Back in heaven, God watched Job's faithful response. Satan returned, disappointed but not defeated. He only cares about things, not his own skin. Satan argued. Let me hurt his body too. God saw Job's pure heart shining brighter than ever. You may test his health, God said, but you must spare his life. Meanwhile on earth, Job woke with strange pains. Red sores popped up on his arms like bubbling stew. By noon, his whole body itched and burned. He scratched with broken pottery, but nothing helped. Neighbors were in shock when they saw him. Children hid behind their mothers. Even Job's dogs whined and stayed away. But through the pain, Job remembered, God was still good. Even when nothing made sense, even when his skin hurt, even when friends disappeared. That truth became his bandage, his medicine, his light in the dark. After losing everything, Job didn't yell or scream. He quietly took off his fancy coat and put on rough sackcloth instead. He shaved his head like people did when very sad. Then he knelt in the dust where his children used to play. Instead of angry words, Job whispered prayers. Instead of blaming God, he bowed lower. His tears made little holes in the dry ground like gentle rain. Neighbors peeked through their curtains, surprised. Why isn't Job shouting at God? They wondered. Even the birds stopped singing to watch this strange sight, a rich man sitting in ashes, still praising God. A little boy tugged at his mother's dress. Why is Job smiling? He lost everything. His mother shook her head, unable to explain. Then something wonderful happened. Job began singing. His scratchy voice rose like smoke from the ashes. The neighborhood dogs cocked their heads. Though his clothes were dirty and his skin hurt, Job's song grew stronger. It wasn't a happy song. It wasn't a sad song. It was a trusting song, like when you hold someone's hand in the dark. And somewhere up in heaven, God smiled. Job's wife brought him water, but he didn't drink. His servants offered food, but he shook his head. For 7 days and nights, Job just sat quietly, thinking about God's love. Sometimes he touched the children's toys lying in the dirt, but he never stopped trusting. The village children would tiptoe near, then run away giggling when Job smiled at them. His eyes were red from crying, but his heart stayed soft like fresh bread. Job's wife covered her face when she saw him. Just curse God and die, she sobbed. But Job shook his hurting head. Should we only take good things from God, he whispered. Not the hard things too? Then he crawled back to his pile of ashes, waiting to see what God would do next. God watched Job's painful situation with loving eyes. He saw every tear, every sore, every lonely moment. Though he allowed the test, his heart ached for his faithful servant. An angel whispered, "Lord, shall we stop this now?" God shook his head gently. "Not yet. My servant's faith is growing brighter than the noonday sun. Soon all will see its glory." Meanwhile, Job kept breathing through the pain. When sores cracked on his knees, he still tried to kneel. When his mouth hurt too much to eat, he still thanked God for the morning birdsong. The village children started leaving small gifts, a cool melon by his sleeping mat, a handful of dates wrapped in leaves. Job would smile weakly, his cracked lips bleeding, but his eyes still shining with quiet trust. Job's sickness grew worse. The little red bumps became big, ugly sores all over his body. They hurt like bee stings and itched like ant bites at the same time. Job couldn't sit or lie down comfortably. His skin cracked when he moved. At night, he curled up on a pile of ashes outside town because the smell kept people away. He scratched his sores with broken pottery pieces, but it only made them worse. Children ran away when they saw him. Friends stopped visiting. Even the kind baker held his nose when Job walked by. Only stray dogs stayed near, licking his wounds when he slept. Mourning was worst. Stiff scabs tore open when he moved. The sores oozed yellow liquid that stuck his clothes to his skin. Sometimes he cried so hard no sound came out. But Job never stopped praying. With cracked lips, he whispered, "God made my mouth that can't taste food. God made my hands that can't hold tools. God made my skin that hurts so bad. He must have reasons I don't understand." As he prayed, a little lizard crawled onto his knee. It sat very still, as if listening. Job smiled gently. "Even you remember God's goodness," he said. The desert wind carried his quiet words up to heaven where God heard every one. One little girl wasn't afraid. Each dawn she left a clay cup of cool water, a fig wrapped in leaves, sometimes a desert flower. Job kept these gifts in a special hole in the rock. They reminded him that goodness still existed, even in pain. Like a seed pushing through hard dirt, Job's faith grew stronger through suffering. He didn't know it yet, but his story would help millions of hurting people for thousands of years. Job's body became covered in painful sores that made every movement hurt. The once strong man who could lift sheep now struggled to sit up. His skin, once touched only by the finest fabrics, now stuck to his rough sackcloth with dried blood and medicine. The village children who used to beg for his stories now hid behind their mothers when he shuffled by. Job's wife watched her strong husband become weaker each day. Her heart broke seeing him scratch his itching skin with broken pottery shards. One evening, as Job moaned in his sleep, she couldn't take it anymore. "Why do you still hold on to your faith?" she cried. "Just curse God and let this end." Job turned his sore-covered face toward her. Though his body ached, his voice remained steady. "Should we only accept good things from God and never trouble?" he whispered. His words hung in the air like dust motes in sunlight, small but unshakable. That night, Job lay staring at the stars through his torn tent roof. Though his skin burned and his bones ached, his spirit remained unbroken. The same hands that once counted gold coins now counted blessings instead, the cool night breeze, the distant owl's call, the memory of his children's laughter. Job's story teaches us that even when life hurts, God is still good. Bad things happen to everyone, even people who love God. But pain doesn't mean God has stopped loving us. Like a father watching his child learn to walk, God sometimes allows us to stumble so we can grow stronger. Job lost everything, his animals, his wealth, even his children. His body ached, his friends misunderstood him, and his wife begged him to give up. But Job never let go of one truth: God is worthy of trust, even when life doesn't make sense. When we face hard times, we can remember. God sees us, even when we feel alone. Pain has a purpose, even when we can't see it yet. Job's friends thought they had all the answers, but only God knew the whole story. Sometimes, the most faithful thing we can do is say, "I don't understand, but I'll keep trusting." And here's the surprise: God never left Job. Even in the ashes, even in the pain, he was working something beautiful. The sores would heal. The tears would dry. Joy would come again, but not in the way Job expected. Because tomorrow, the storm clouds will part. Tomorrow, a voice will shake the earth. Tomorrow, God Himself will speak. This story teaches us an incredible lesson about faith and courage. Job was a good man who loved God and helped others, yet he faced terrible troubles, losing his animals, his wealth, and even his children in a single day. Then, painful sores covered his body, and even his friends and wife doubted him. But through it all, Job never stopped trusting God. This story shows children that bad things happen to good people, But God never leaves us. Pain doesn't mean God is angry, sometimes He's growing our faith. Real strength comes from trust, not from having everything perfect. Job could have screamed at God or given up. Instead, he chose to believe even when nothing made sense. His story reminds us that God sees our tears and has a plan, even in the darkest moments. The most amazing part? Job's story wasn't over. His faith in the middle of suffering prepared him for an unbelievable surprise. Get ready for part 2, the miracle after the storm.